Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to talk about CVA and Tailwind CSS. I will talk to you about what CVA basically is, its main features, and how I use it together with Tailwind CSS. I'm going to use this example of this button element, style it with you, and show you all the features that CVA can bring. So let's go into the code. You can see we've got a basic button, no styles applied to it, and we're going to start styling and giving it the base styles. So in here, as we would do with Tailwind CSS, we will apply some basic styles like a background color. We definitely need some padding, and we possibly also want to have rounded corners. And then let's have a look. This looks good already. Let's apply some hover state, like BG neutral 200, and then potentially also add some transition. Let's have a look. Let me also do something like font medium, and now it looks pretty decent, right? What happens if we want to say, for example, this one is just a style for a cancel button, and then we also want to have one for our primary action, which is submit, right? This shouldn't be looking the same. So we go ahead, invert the colors, for example, like background 800, then maybe text white so that we can read the text. And then on hover, we go full black and say, there we go, we've got our buttons. What happens if we have a third one? Are we going to copy this all over again? This is where I want to introduce CVA, because CVA makes this a lot easier. So let me import CVA. And what CVA does is CVA gives us the opportunity to build composable components using a similar technique like stitches or other CSS and JS toolings. And let me show this. So let's create a const button using CVA and add the base class. So what CVA here does is, as you can see, this will give us a function that takes in variance and returns a string basically. Our base styles is defined on this base key, and what we can see is like all of our buttons here have all of these class names in common, right? So I will copy this over, and there we go. And then as the next step, we will have a look at adding these separate new styles. For us, this means we've got I would say a primary button, a secondary button, and potentially something that I would call a arrow button or something. And all of them are based on the same variant. So what I will do is I will create a variant, call it intent. And here we can have a primary button, a secondary button, and a arrow button. All right, let me quickly copy over all of this. I'm just going to copy the styles that we have here. All right, I've copied over the styles, and for the arrow, what we want to do is we probably want to have a different color, like maybe neutral 100, and then also a text color, text red like 600, and then also for the default one, this should be secondary. and this should be primary. And for the secondary one, we possibly also want to have a text color neutral 950 or something. All right. And now what we can do is like we can go ahead and remove this. Let me do this for all three. Like we can remove this and say button and call the button function. And in here, we can specify the intent. So for this one, what did we say? This is our secondary button. And this is going to be our primary button. And lastly, this is our error button. If we now check our code, you can see all of this worked except for me missing to copy over the color. There we go. This is all working as expected. I also should change this to red. And we have it. All right. So one thing that we can do here is instead of always having to add the right intent, you can also make sure that we have a default intent set by. So if I, for example, remove this, right now this button has no color. This might be intended, but if you want to say no, every button needs to have a default intent, we can go in here and say default variance. And then for every variant we have, we can define the default. There you go. And now our cancel button, the second one, is also basically a secondary button. Let me remove this one. Okay. What else do we have? One thing we possibly want to note is like, this doesn't always have to be hard coded. Like we could also say like const, I don't know, intent, and then like use state. Let's say it has to be, can either be error or primary. Yeah. And then what we can do is just pass this over here and make this undefined, and this will work. So what would we expect here? Because intent is right now undefined, it will fall back to secondary button, as you can see. It does. And if we pass in a value, for example, error, this goes to error. And if you change it to primary, it goes to primary. So we could even do something like set intent and change the intent on click. So on click, set intent to error. And suddenly this works. And we can do magic things like on form submit if we have a loading state or something like that. And we can have basically styles that change based on state. Easy as this. Let's have a look at another case. Imagine we have this first set of buttons, but then we suddenly also have a button that's mainly outlined. What we would do here is we would say outline, which will define a new variant, like additional to intent. And this one is only true or false. So this is a Boolean. And here we say we want to have it outline, and that's it for now. Yeah. If we now say here outline is true, what do we get? We've got a button outlined, but the default value for intent is still secondary. We could go ahead and say BG neutral and then BG transparent to get rid of this, and then also get rid of the hover state. Let's say BG transparent as well. But what we ideally want is we want to make sure that when outline is together with intent, we want to have a new set of classes applied. And for that, we can say compound variance and say, for example, this needs to be an array. In our case of intent being secondary and outline being true, we want to have the classes that I've mentioned here. If we now have a look, you can see it's gone. Let me add a proper state here. Let's say transition all. Let's move this transition to here, but then here we also have an outline offset 2. So now we have a on hover, obviously. Now we have a different animation for the outline buttons, and thanks to this compound variant, we have basically a new or unset our background colors. Let's have a look at adding this in here. What happens? Of course, this is not working as expected, because now we still have this background color, because we only specified this compound variant for these, right? We could now go ahead and do the same thing for primary or error. Let me do this. Now this is basically no, for primary, and now you will see our text color is gone because we removed the background. So what we would want to do here is text black or something, and now both of them work as expected. But instead of doing it this way, why don't we go ahead and say, for example, primary, and then we delete this. Let's take this over. And now what we see is, regardless of secondary or primary, if outline is true, we have the same styles. We could still go ahead and say for error, we won't do that. For error, we want to do something else and do our own changes. Like we could, for example, say for error, we have a different color, outline red 100, and let me do outline true. And we also want to change the text color, text red 300, 500, and now we have a different outline. Let me do 500 here as well. Yeah, there you go. So now we have basically said for the compound variants, we want to have different classes. I think that's the main logic. But what happens if we have one off case? Like let's say, for example, if we do this false again, we have our default button. Like we can remove this as well, because instead we will just do outline is false by default in our default variant. And now we have a regular default button for the cancel, but we get a requirement in that we say for this particular button, but not for any other button, we want to have a different text color, because this cancel might destroy something. We want to have it red. What would we do? One thing we can do is, like, as we passed in variants here, like outline or whatever, we can also pass in a class name. So we can say text red 500 here, and this will basically be appended to anything that's coming from this button here. So if you can look here, if we go into our DevTools, you will also see how our color got appended. That's pretty much it for variants and overriding like compositions. But there's one last thing that I'm going to show you that will wrap this introductory bit. That's, let's say for example, we have a new component, let's call it cart. And the cart is basically nothing more than a white background, maybe a shadow, and it also has a larger rounded corner. Let's give it some padding, and no, let's not even give it a padding because the cart content should not matter. Let's say we want to now have a button that is basically clickable, or a card that acts as a button. What would we do here? What we can do is, and that's the magic of CVA, instead of doing some magic things of getting these together, what we will do is we will import CX from CVA, and that works basically exactly like the class names package you might possibly know. I think it's even the class names package under the hood, or the CLSX package. But we can go ahead and say we have the button here, but then we also have the card classes. So if we now have a look, we now have a button that basically is also a card at the same time, which is pretty much what we want, right? And if we say we want to override this the other way around, now we have a button by default, a card by default that takes in all the styles from a button as well. And we can go like further and further ahead with this by composing like different types of class names. And yeah, that's it for today. I think if you like think about this, like this could be extracted, and then you could like use this to build your own style guide, or like your component library. And the good thing here is, because this is purely JavaScript function that output style like class names, this is not bound to any library. Like you could use this, have your own classes or something, and then create a component library just on your own without any React or Vue or whatever. I think that's like pretty strong, and that's what makes CVA so interesting. Maybe if you're interested, comment in the comment below if you're interested, but I can show you how I would extract this for a React library and have like properly typed components that you can like use. But I would say that's for another video. So I will see you there. Bye bye.